Good evening, Crypt Keepers, and welcome to Cryptique, where we discuss all things paranormal, occult, UFOs, metaphysical, hidden history, forbidden archaeology, and all things truther. I am joined, as always, by my boy, Ryan. What's up?
Must be good climate where you're at. You did all that in one breath. Impressive.
It's nice. All I have is a candle burning off to the side here, but, that keeps me connected to the spirit world, Ryan. You know that.
Okay. Yeah, of course. When I was I knew so many people who thought that candles, if somebody had candles or kind of anything from like a Spencer's or whatever, that they were trying to do magic because of the Harry Potter books in like the early 90s.
Demon
Like, are you
worship.
trying to summon something? You got candles in your room.
Yeah.
It's like, what are you talking about?
I see that on podcasts too, where they're like, well, this kid wore black to school. You should check him out. The cops are like, okay, we'll check him out. I'm like, what? Did I miss something? I go back and rewind. Oh, no, it's because he's wearing black. Oh, okay.
Yeah, judge a book by its cover.
Exactly. All right. You want to tell them what they need to know then?
Yeah, I'm just a little thrown off by not having the usual jokes.
Sorry.
Or having you dig at me. Yeah, as always, and I'm going to try to shorten these, and maybe we should stop doing these at the beginning, but we do want to plead with you to interact with the show on whatever your platform is. Like, subscribe, comment, all those things help us with the algorithms. But the best thing you can do, as always, is to share it with somebody you know and somebody who you think will like it. It is honestly the best way for it to spread. We've seen a lot of really viral stuff in the last year or so, things that got really popular that maybe shouldn't have, like Sound of Freedom, I think. Small budget movie that got huge. Godzilla -1. Small budget thing, not really advertised, got huge. We want to be the next thing.
Please.
Cryptique. Yeah, didn't advertise a whole lot, got huge by word of mouth. But if you want to reach out to us and tell us how ridiculous that is, or recommend something to us by word of mouth, you can do that at cryptiquepodcast@gmail.com. You can check out what we're selling at cryptiquepodcaststore.com, and you can always find our socials and the links in the show notes, or at least account names or how to get there, depending on what our platforms let us post.
Right.
I'm sure not all of them want you linking out.
Sure. And did you mention buy me a coffee?
No, I didn't.
I'm so thirsty. I can hardly talk. Well, actually, they probably like that. You can buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/CryptiquePI, because we need to keep the energy up, the mic's on, and we got huge electric bills to pay.
Obviously.
Tonight, Cryptique is proud to present Steve Goreham on the coming renewable energy failure in his new book, Green Breakdown. Steve Goreham, an engaging and experienced speaker with a background as an independent scholar, researcher, and former engineer and business executive, and offers compelling programs on energy and environmental policy. With 30 years of Fortune 100 and private company experience, he serves as the executive director of the Climate Science Coalition of America. The executive director of the Climate Science Coalition of America. He's no joke, Ryan. And he's also a policy advisor to the Heartland Institute. He has agreed to come on and slum it with us tonight. He's the author of 4 books and a frequent guest on radio and TV. He provides a fresh perspective on environmental, economic, energy, climate, and public policy topics, presenting in a down-to-earth style with humor and stories that appeal to a broad audience. And we are so happy to have him on the show tonight. We are going to talk about climatism, and he's going to tell us all about it. So, all right. So let's see. Well, welcome to the show, Steve. I'm Jay. You see Ryan on the screen there too. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. How are you doing?
Ryan, great. I'm doing well. Happy New Year.
It's great to have you on, man. I've been listening to, you are quite the prolific podcaster. I mean, there's 1,000 of them out there, and the information is just so important that people have no idea what's going on. They just buy into, oh yeah, it's getting hotter, it's my fault, and I'm terrible. I think it has a psychological effect on people that they think that they're destroying the earth.
Well, it
But
certainly does. And there's, if you read an article on climate today, most likely it's wrong in many ways. So you're right. There's a lot of misinformation out there.
absolutely. So before we get started, can you just give us a little background on yourself, your books, and kind of what got you into the topic?
So yeah, I was in the electronics industry for about 30 or 35 years, worked at Motorola for quite a while. Out of work business executive about 2008, didn't want to move out of the Chicago area,
Mhm.
and said, well, you can research, you can write. I wasn't really sure of the topic, but I read all of Al Gore's books, decided they probably weren't correct, started writing on climate change. And then since then, I've written 4 books and I've become a professional speaker.
Mhm.
I speak to all sorts of different industry, mostly transportation, agriculture, energy, metals, all sorts of folks about energy and about climate.
Mhm.
And then recently wrote my 4th book, Green Breakdown, The Coming Renewable Energy Failure, that was out August 1st. And since then, as you know, I've been doing a lot of radio and a lot of video.
Absolutely. The facts are so simple, but they're so convoluted from what we see from the media that it's really nice to see a simple breakdown that everybody can understand, and you do that. So we really appreciate that. Um, you gave us some stuff that you wanted to get into, and then we've got some questions of our own towards the end. But so the United Nations Climate Conference, COP28, was completed in Dubai, and that's in the United Arab Emirates. That's in early December.
Yeah,
They're doing okay there, right? Like there's not a whole lot of people suffering for money in Dubai. Am
not
I right
really.
on that?
It is the United Nations annual event, the COP. It's the Conference of the Parties. It's the 28th one of these they have. They have one basically every year,
Mhm.
and they get delegates together from all over the world. They've been doing this since about 1995. This year we had uh, King Charles III was there, billionaire Bill Gates, a U.S. climate envoy John Kerry. We had our Vice President Kamala Harris. Many states have sent folks from universities. And there were about 80,000 people that came, and just about nobody lives in Dubai. So they all flew in on private and commercial jets. And the interesting thing is, if you fly on an aircraft and you burn jet fuel, which they all do, for every pound of jet fuel that you burn, you emit about 3 pounds of carbon dioxide. And so, literally, this climate conference was the biggest carbon dioxide emitting vent of the year
Yeah, a little bit
Crazy.
in
ironic.
Dubai. A little bit ironic there.
Oh man, you can't make that up. That's just too good. Well, we do. At least we know that Greta Thunberg is you know traveling the world in her yacht. Maybe we should just all use our yachts. Is that the problem? We're not
Well,
all using our yachts?
she often refuses to fly. You're referring to the young woman from Sweden, I believe it is, who often
Mhm.
refuses to fly and takes a boat to get somewhere over
Yeah.
the ocean, which takes a couple weeks usually. It's very slow. But unfortunately, she's been misled by this whole idea I call climatism.
Mhm.
Climatism is the belief that humans are causing dangerous global warming. We do have a couple presidential candidates now using that term. It was in my first 2 books.
Mhm.
My first book, Climatism, my second, The Mad, Mad, Mad World of Climatism. Uh, but both Mr. Ramaswamy and former President Trump are now using the term. And it is a powerful ideology. It's captured most of the leaders of the world. My opinions are minority opinions. The world is spending about $1 trillion a year now on renewable energy to try and stop the planet from warming. But when you really get down and you look at the science, you realize that uh, Earth's climate continues to be dominated by natural factors.
Right.
What's going on in the solar system, the oceans, the land, the atmosphere, and not by your neighbor's SUV or power plants.
Absolutely. And uh, there's this huge push for EVs. And one of my favorite things I like to joke with Ryan about is I see these, take my dog for a walk and he just ruins the environment when he poops. But I love seeing, I walk past these houses. They've got 2 Teslas in their driveway, and they have these little signs that say, oh, this, don't let your dog walk on my grass because it's got pesticide and fertilizer all over it and it could be harmful. And I'm like, well, there you go. You're saving the world. You got an EV, you're poisoning the water table, but hey, at least you're not putting out any carbon emissions. So, but that's not
Right.
the case. Tell us about how these EVs are like manipulated to make it seem like they're saving the world, but they're not.
Yeah, there's pretty big misconception about electric vehicles. They don't put out a lot of carbon dioxide emissions, probably about half over a long lifetime. Although the world's EVs right now probably put out more carbon dioxide than internal combustion engines. And the reason is when they are first made, to make the batteries takes an awful lot of energy. And it's not until about 100,000 miles of driving that an electric vehicle breaks even on carbon dioxide emissions. And most of the EV fleets are young, so they're still putting out a lot more carbon dioxide than they're able to make up from driving. But the sad thing is that a lot of people believe that they are helping the environment by driving electric vehicles. But there are other issues with electric vehicles. And the first thing is the amount of metals that go into them.
Mm-hmm.
According to the International Energy Agency, an electric vehicle has about 6 times the special metals of a gasoline car. And that's graphite and copper and nickel and manganese, cobalt, lithium. And those have to come from mines, of course. And if you look back on the trail of the mining, you find things that are really not very, very good. An example is cobalt. The Democratic Republic of Congo produces about 35% of the world's cobalt, and cobalt ore, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
And it's well known that in the DRC, they're using child labor and forced labor to get this ore out of the hills. And so there's big social impacts there. And then the ore is shipped to China. Most of it. China is the largest refiner of metals in the world. And in China, there are vast areas of land that have been polluted by their metal industry. There's a place called Rare Earth Lake, where literally, as far as you can see in all direction, the land has been destroyed by iron waste from producing metals.
Mm-hmm.
Then those metals go into batteries that come to the United States so that people can buy their Teslas, and they say, wow, I'm driving an environmentally friendly car. But they don't see all the mining damage and the social damage that's occurring all over the world. Every energy system has disadvantages,
Sure.
but it's not clear that EVs really are helping the planet as people think.
Well, is the goal to get to zero emissions? Because I do believe that most of the people, now Teslas might be fun and cool or whatever, but if you're buying an EV to save the environment, do people even look into how that came to be? How, you have to run. I was looking for, I had a slide on my phone where it's something like a caterpillar has to run for like 200 hours to like pull X amount of lithium out of the ground, and they run on diesel fuel, and people they don't look at any of the background. It's just, oh, look at me, I'm so virtuous, I'm saving the environment. But there's the problem is getting them to market. It's not afterward. Well, it is afterwards when you think about our electricity being powered by coal. So, I mean,
Well, it
they're
is. It is. Yeah. The whole idea of getting to zero emissions. And by the way, that's what my book Green Breakdown is about. Today, the wealthy part of the world, the wealthy nations, the United States, Europe, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and a few others are driving toward a thing called net zero. And they want to do that by 2050. And the idea is to completely get rid of all carbon dioxide emissions or capture whatever they can't do. And to do that, they want to get rid of coal, oil, and natural gas. But this is really an impossible dream. This is beyond a reach out goal. It's not going to happen. Things are going to break down. Just to give you an example, if you build any kind of a building and you put steel into it and you put glass into it and you put copper for pipes and you put ceramic and you put concrete into it, all of those things emit carbon dioxide when they are produced and when they are transported to the building site. You can't even build a grass hut without emitting carbon dioxide. If you cut down the grass and you cut down the wood and you build a grass hut, you emit carbon dioxide. So there's really nothing in this world that is net zero of any reasonable size. Nevertheless, the world is marching toward this crazy goal. One example is what John Kerry was talking about. In early December, he called for a ban on all coal-fired power plants around the world. Well, you look at that and you go, does that really make any kind of sense? There are about 6,500 coal-fired power plants around the world, and there's another 1,000 that are in planning or are being constructed, and they provide 35% of the world's electricity. But we have a big electricity shortage globally. There are 700 million people without access to electricity. And there are literally hundreds of hospitals that don't have electricity, if you can imagine that. Nothing for air conditioning, nothing for operating rooms. And then there's another 2 billion people that have blackouts or brownouts every day or every other day. We have a tremendous shortage of electricity. But for climate envoy Kerry to say, get rid of all your coal plants, that's a little like Marie Antoinette saying, let the poor people eat cake. I mean, it has no regard for the people around the world that are trying to build their societies and need electricity.
Yeah.
So this is kind of what the wealthy nations are pursuing, but it doesn't make a lot of economic sense.
It doesn't make any sense because, I mean, you've illustrated on one of the slides, like how we've had kind of a gentle warming for like the past 45 years, but it's not, they want you to believe that, if we don't all drive electric vehicles, the whole world's going to be underwater in 10 years. And it's not the case. And, all these forests and stuff that give us all this oxygen, they need that carbon, they need those carbon emissions to produce the oxygen that we breathe. So that could be a problem.
We do. It's an amazing system. An advisor of mine by the name of Will Happer, a atmospheric scientist from Princeton University, says we're really at a low point of atmospheric carbon dioxide right now, about 420 parts per million. That's about 4 molecules in every 10,000 in the atmosphere. That's been thousands, 7 or 8 times as high in the past. And if plants get down to about 200 or 250 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, they literally can't grow. And we do have a great situation right now. This carbon dioxide going in the atmosphere is helping the world green, helping the plants grow. By the way, I love to ask a question when I speak to groups. I say, what do cannabis growers know that the EPA apparently doesn't know?
That one I don't know.
And the answer is that carbon dioxide is plant food. Any marijuana grower worth his or her salt is literally pumping carbon dioxide into their greenhouse to make their crop grow bigger and faster. And if you look at the top 95 food crops, the top 45 food crops of the world that provide 95% of our food, every one of those grows bigger and faster with higher levels of atmospheric carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Each one of us exhales about 2 pounds of carbon dioxide every single day. So calling it a pollutant is really kind of a faulty idea.
Are they going to tell us to start holding our breath and don't exercise or anything like that, so you don't get your lungs pumping so much?
Well, it's kind of funny if you're in a conference room and the doors are closed. You got a number of people in there. You can get up to 800 or 900 parts per million carbon dioxide. You double what's in the normal atmosphere. And I think the astronauts and the Navy submarines have a limit of about 7,000 parts per million carbon dioxide, 15 or 20 times as high before it becomes really a health issue. So we shouldn't be calling it a pollutant. It's a great part of nature. It's literally the best compound we can put into the biosphere is carbon dioxide. Yet today we have every university every company counting their carbon dioxide footprint. Very, very foolish.
What do you think that these people that, we hold in such esteem, these people that so many depend on to make these huge life affecting decisions, do they believe this, or is this just a sneaky way for them to control or get more money, or because I just don't understand how someone can look at like the slides, read your book, or listen to you and still think that we've got to get to net zero. I mean, what is their end game?
Well, it is remarkable. I like to say we're in the biggest superstition in modern history, but I think most people believe this. I think Al Gore, for example, he's been an environmentalist since the 1970s.
Mhm.
I don't know what's in a person's heart, but I think most folks believe this stuff. But nevertheless, people can use climatism and the fear of man-made warming to get all kinds of policies across.
Mhm.
We have wind, solar, and biofuels industries. We have roughly 25 or 30 computer modeling teams that do climate models, and they cost about $50 million to set up on a supercomputer and then $20 million a year to run. And if they put up their hand and say, well, I think climate is natural, then they're probably not going to get any funding anymore. We have deans of sustainability at universities. We have vice presidents of sustainability at companies. And so there's tremendous momentum behind climatism and the fear of man-made warming. News media loves it. They
Yeah.
can create all kinds of headlines about it's the hottest day ever. Or we had this last summer, Fortune had a headline, July could be the hottest month in 120,000 years. And then the United Nations said the era of global boiling has arrived. But those are flat out wrong, and they weren't really challenged in many ways. If you look back in history, we've had about 1 degree of warming since 1880, 1 degree Celsius, about 2 degrees Fahrenheit. We get that every morning between 9 and 10 a.m. But that's really not much of a rise compared to history. That's, by the way, the 140 years is about as long as we've had thermometers.
Right.
But scientists can use other chemical reactions called proxies to go back farther. And what you find is that it was warmer 1,000 years ago. The Vikings settled southwest Greenland. And on that site, there were trees that were 20 feet high. Today, there's nothing but scrub grasses.
Right.
The Romans conquered the Mediterranean 2,000 years ago. And at that time, they were growing olives in Germany because it was warmer. They were growing grapes for wine in England. And I love to mention the example of the Rhone Glacier. If any of your listeners have been to Switzerland, there's a big glacier between mountains, wall to wall, called the Rhone Glacier in central Switzerland, and the Rhone River flows out of it west into France and down into the Mediterranean. But that glacier has been receding for more than a century. It's pulling back as we've had a gentle warming. But every time it pulls back, they find interesting things under it, like horse bridles, and they find wagon wheels, and they find wood that was 4,000 years old. And one scientist, Dr. Christian Schluter, has pointed out that for most of the last 10,000 years, this glacier was not here. There was no ice in this valley. And so we've had many, many times when it's naturally warmer than today. Nevertheless, the news media rings with all sorts of alarm that we're causing this danger and that people are dying.
Yeah, and I've shown people. I work with some people that are very into this, and I've shown them just a picture of the sun where it has like a solar storm, right? And it's increasing. I mean, it's basically like an explosion that goes out, and I'm like, don't you guys think this could have something to do with it too? Because if the sun is getting hotter at this point, at this stage, and making the earth hotter, that seems like something that would make more sense than just, oh no, it's just us putting pollutants in the air.
Well, it
But
is, and there's a number of scientists that think that the sun is affecting that. There's actually a thing called the solar wind, which comes out from the sun continuously, and when we have more sunspots or we have things erupt on the sun, the solar wind gets stronger. But it's a bunch of subatomic particles that come out like a wind, and it tends to, for one thing, it causes the aurora borealis in our atmosphere. That's when these particles come into the atmosphere, and you see that near the poles. But it tends to affect the ions that are coming from deep space, the subatomic particles, and this affects our cloud cover. And I talk about the theories in my first two books, Climatism and the Mad, Mad, Mad World of Climatism. But there's a lot of evidence to show that what the sun is doing in this regard is affecting our cloud cover, and therefore the amount of solar energy we get, and therefore the temperature on the Earth. So again, that's just another example of where nature is very powerful, much bigger than what a solar system, a solar farm is going to do.
Yeah.
And I think that, and I thought this too, I was guilty of this before I started, listening to you, that maybe if we can find a way to increase solar power, bigger fields, but it's just going to take so much land that
Yes.
it doesn't make sense. And windmills. And then I heard that there's windmills that literally don't break even from what it takes to put them up. They don't even break even by the time they're done and ready to be dismantled and buried in the earth. So it's not something that we can fix with windmills and solar panels, is it?
That may be the case with windmills. I don't know the data on that. I do know that solar, if you're in the northern latitudes, and the break-even point is about the Virginia North Carolina border, something like the 30th latitude. But above that, it takes more energy to produce the solar system, the solar installation, and to set it up than you get back over the life of the solar system. If any of your listeners want to send me an email, I can send them the paper. A guy did a study in Switzerland and Germany, which are higher latitudes, and they've got all these solar systems. And he said, well, those things only return about 80% of the energy that it took to put up over the lifetime of it. So it is kind of crazy. If you're in Hawaii or if you're in the deep south, solar can be effective, except when the clouds pass over, of course. But the idea that we can run our society on wind and solar doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's always seemed like it would be unsustainable to have so much land dedicated to it.
Yeah, that's and again, another question I ask audiences, I say, so consider two systems. One system produces 1 unit of electricity on 1 unit of land, and another system produces 1 unit of electricity on 100 units of land. Which is more environmentally friendly?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it seems obvious, but the ones that produce 1 unit of electricity for 1 unit of land are nuclear and natural gas and coal, and solar requires 100 times the land. Wind something like 35 to 800 times the land. If you
Wow.
count only the towers and the concrete pads and the roads, it's about 35 times as much land. If you count the whole area, it's 800. Biofuels also are like 1,500 times the land. So, and that's part of the reason why, in trying to convert to wind and solar, a lot of these areas are running into problems now. They're getting a lot of opposition from local people because you have to take all this farmland out of use or other sort of things. And in Scotland, they've cut down about 10 million trees over the last 2 decades to try and put up all these wind turbines, and that doesn't seem to make much environmental sense.
Yeah, in Chicago in particular, when you start heading west out of the city, there are tons of windmills all over the place, west and southwest of Chicago.
Yeah,
And
Southwest.
it just seems impractical because I was driving for maybe an hour in that area, and there were just windmills everywhere, and I kept wondering, like, how difficult is it to logistically work out where to put them, how to connect them, like, how could it be worth it? When you
Yeah,
head south to Springfield, you see the nuclear power plant and no windmills, no very little solar because the power is so cheap and efficiently produced.
that is an advantage for Illinois. We do have nuclear. But so for wind and solar, the first problem is the land area. The second problem is the cost. And the headlines ring with all this stuff saying wind and solar is cheaper, and they might be on a per unit basis. But if you look at anywhere they've been deployed, and I like to show a map of not a map, but a chart about Europe, where I plot on one axis the wind and solar capacity of a nation, watts per person, and then on the horizontal axis the electricity prices. Now, if wind and solar were the cheapest, the nations that deployed the most wind and solar, should have the lowest electricity prices.
Yes.
But you find it's exactly the opposite. We have nations like Ireland where the price is twice as high as the United States. And then Denmark and Germany are way up there at more than 3 times the United States price. They are the biggest users of wind and solar in the world right now, at least wind. And so, and the reasons are that you have to run a lot of transmission out to remote areas, and then you have to back them up with systems for when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. And that is the third big problem with renewables is the intermittency.
Right.
Let me read you a quote from a guy, if I might. You want to ask your question first?
Oh, no, go ahead.
So in June of this year, Mark Christie testified in front of the Senate. Mark is a Federal Energy Regulatory Commission commissioner. And he said, quote, "I think we're headed for dire consequences, potentially catastrophic consequences in the United States in terms of the reliability of our grid." And he went on to explain that we're closing coal and natural gas plants, and in some case nuclear plants, too fast. And these are the things that keep the lights on. And we've had some big incidents. We had a blackout in Texas, February of 2021, and the power was off for 72 hours, 3 days, to 5 million people. And between 200 and 700 people died. Those are the estimates. That's bigger than a major hurricane.
Yeah.
And in part, that's because Texas has closed a lot of coal plants and has pushed for renewables. Data from the Energy Information Administration also shows that the average outage for an electricity user is increasing. They've been tracking these figures for a while. Back in 2013, 2014, the average cumulative outage, not individual, but for a whole year, for a user was about 3.5 hours. Now that's running about 6, 7, or 8 hours a year. So it's more than doubled. And as we close coal and gas plants and put in more wind and solar, we're going to have more and more outages.
Well, and then, yeah, like you said, we have to have the coal and nuclear and natural gas, because what happens if the wind stops blowing and the sun doesn't shine for a few days? You got people in hospitals where the generators run out, and then what happens then? We lose lives, we lose people. And I can't imagine that it's cheaper to keep the like the coal and natural gas and nuclear kind of ready to go in the background just in case it
Right.
fails.
Well, that's what helps boost the cost as well. So if you're a utility manager, you know that when you add wind and solar, you can only count on about 10% of the capacity that you add as an adder to system capacity. So that means if you want to do high wind and solar penetration, you have to keep about 90% of the traditional power plants around, and you have to keep them ready to be turned on. And so you're doubling your capacity, and it's very, very expensive. And another example is I have another chart. I don't think I sent you guys, but I plot the top 12 wind states in the United States and look at their electricity price increases over the last 14 years. Now, the national average has gone up about 28% since 2008. But in 8 of the 12 wind states, their rates are up much higher than the average. California is the highest. It's up more than 50%. But and that is the reason, because they have to build transmission out to these sites in long distances, because they have to keep backup of traditional power plants. So the evidence shows that wind and solar are not less expensive, and the more we put in, the more people are going to have to pay higher prices.
Is it going to get to a point where they're just like, yeah, heating your house or your electricity bill is going to be $3,000 a month, or you can just not have electricity. It's up to you. Because I mean, it seems like if it keeps going up and keeps going up and keeps going up, we're going to have to right now, whatever percentage of our salary goes to electricity, we're
Yep.
not going to be able to afford it.
Yeah, and it really impacts the poor.
Yeah.
Northern California, I was just reading the article, they're going to have $300 a month electric bills in the Pacific gas and electric region. They keep getting price increases. California is now, over the last 3 years, passed up all of New England to become the second highest electricity price state in the nation, behind Hawaii. And their prices are double what they are in any other Western state. And they're going to go much, much higher because they continue to try and put in big batteries and wind and solar, and it's just going to get very, very expensive.
Now, you had told, I can't remember where I heard it, but how California is in, I'm not sure if it's this January that you were talking about, where everything that gets picked up by, I guess, a well, not a diesel anymore, they have to be on an electric truck. Is that this year that everything has to be picked up on an
Yes,
electric truck? Gosh.
it's supposed to start January 1st, although they're not enforcing it right now. They've stepped back a little bit to give people some more months. But so they passed a thing called the Advanced Clean Fleets Regulation.
Okay.
And it basically says in 3 categories of trucks as of January 2024, if you're going to register or license a new truck in the state of California, in these 3 categories, it must be a zero emissions vehicle, which means for all practical purposes, an electric vehicle.
Right.
So these are drayage trucks. Those are trucks that take containers from ports and either transport them or bring them to railheads. There's also the state fleets have to be zero emissions. And then if you're a big company, if you have either 50 trucks or something like $50 million in business, all your new trucks have to be electric, zero emissions. And that's just crazy stuff. By the way, we have something like 19 states that are now suing the EPA in California for, particularly the EPA, for allowing California to put this regulation into place. Now, if you look at trucks, there's some really, really big issues.
Yeah.
So the first problem is poor range. And I'm getting this data from Andrew Boyle of the American Trucking Association, who also testified this year before the House of Representatives.
Mm-hmm.
So if you fill up a diesel truck, it takes about 15 minutes to fill a typical tank, and it can go 1,200 miles.
Mm-hmm.
But if you charge an electric truck, fully charged, they can only go 150 to 330 miles. So about one eighth of the distance, and it takes you literally hours to charge these trucks.
Yeah.
The electric trucks weigh 10,000 pounds more because of the battery weight.
Right.
And so if you have a 40 or 50,000 pound truck and load, you lose about 10 or 20%. Electric truck cost is very, very high. 2.5 to 3 times the cost of a diesel truck. And then there's very few chargers around. They wanted to put up a charging system near Joliet, Illinois at the intersection of a couple interstates. And they went to the city, and the city goes, you really can't do this. Your charging requirements are too big. Our grid's not going to be able to handle it.
Right.
They just put up a system in California, and they found that if they had it all filled with trucks that were charging, it would take as much electricity as a 200,000 person city like San Bernardino to charge
Yeah,
these
or St.
trucks.
Louis.
Or St. Louis. So it just doesn't make any sense. Nevertheless, California is pushing it.
Yeah, and there's a lot of articles coming out talking about, people who buy Teslas or whatever to use for DoorDash or Uber, and they're finding that constantly charging and discharging those batteries reduces the life dramatically. I mean, the one There was one guy who I think got maybe 40 or 50,000 miles out of his car before it needed a new battery.
Well, that's not too good.
Yeah, and if you're, and I've read the same numbers that you were just talking about. I even saw an interview, I think on a CNBC documentary, where they were talking to a trucker who was saying, "Why would I buy a Tesla semi? If they claim it'll do 500 miles, it'll probably do more like 300 with a load. It takes 8 hours to charge, or I can just buy a cheaper truck that has a sleeper cabin in the back, takes 15 to 20 minutes to fuel up, and I can go 12 to 1,400 miles. And I don't have to worry about a battery being replaced. I can get 1,000,000 miles out of this engine."
Yeah.
Yeah, unless California is forcing you to do it, then you got a problem. But
Yeah.
but I don't think that's going to stand. But yeah, there's a bunch of issues with EVs. So EVs have been penetrating world markets. In 2022, they were about 6% of the U.S. new light vehicles sold. I think last year they were about 8%. I got to update my numbers on that. We have about 2 or 3% of all the vehicles in the world, about 35, 40 million EVs out of 1.5 billion light vehicles globally. But we're starting to run into some problems. And I like to say the EV market has hit a speed bump in this last year. We have inventories up at GM and Ford over 300%. And by the way, the price of used electric vehicles dropped 30% last year. When people buy a new one or they turn one in and go get go back to their gasoline car, nobody wants to buy the used ones.
Right.
Ford is losing somewhere between 40,000 and 60,000 on each electric vehicle sold, and so Ford and GM have stepped back. Cold weather is a problem. I was at a conference and met a guy whose wife had a Tesla. They lived in Cleveland. And 2 winters ago, it got down to 10 degrees Fahrenheit, and they didn't have a heated garage. And literally, they could not charge their vehicle. It would not charge at 10 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, I've got a heated garage, but I wouldn't want to heat it all winter if I got an EV. That would be very, very expensive.
Yeah.
Insurance is another big issue. In the United Kingdom, a lot of companies have stopped insuring EVs. Because when they get into a fender bender, it's hard to tell if the battery's been damaged, and if the battery's damaged in any way, it needs to be replaced, and that can cost like $20,000. So EV insurance right now in England is costing about £5,000 for a year, very expensive.
Gosh.
In the U.S. as well, it's about 70% more to insure an EV than a gasoline vehicle. And for these reasons, Hertz, for example, Hertz was going to go in big with EVs, but they're now getting rid of them. They're selling them, and they're going back to traditional cars. So hey, if you want a cool second car, they're neat. If you can charge in your garage and drive a short distance to work, they're good. But cold weather, insurance, long distance drives just don't seem to work out.
Absolutely. And we're just constantly getting priced out of these markets for cars in general are insane right now. But I went and I wanted to look at the Chevy, I think they call it a Spark.
Okay.
And it is the same exact car as their absolute bottom of the line economy car.
You're confusing the Bolt and the Spark. The Spark is the internal combustion version. The Bolt is the electric one.
Okay. Right.
Yeah, they had a Bolt and a Volt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bolt was a hybrid sort of thing. The Bolt is the fully electric one. I've driven a Bolt. They're super cheap economy cars, but they're electric. So
yeah,
the Spark's like their bottom of the line.
Well, the Spark was the bottom of the line. That's probably like 15, 16,000. The same car electric was 40,000. I'm like, if I'm spending $40,000 on a car, I'm not getting a roller skate bottom of the line car just because it's got an electric motor. It's ridiculous. And now you also, what's the number one cause of fire in New York City these days?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite questions. I like to ask that. It's not cooking and it's not smoking. It's now e-bike lithium batteries. And this is data from the New York Fire Department. They've had they're getting last year they had about 200 fires from e-bikes, up from about 40 fires 3 or 4 years ago, and they've had about 12 people injured from these things. These things tend to just explode, or if you got them, and they're down in the first floor of your apartment or something, and you can't get out of the building. And they have these fires all over the place. Australia has a big problem with it. Other U.S. cities. The problem is that people have been purchasing inexpensive e-bikes, and they're not, and the specs aren't real good, and they're not tested real well, and so they become a big hazard. So that is, I've actually told my wife and I have we live in two places, one in Chicago and one in Virginia Beach, to get close to the kids and grandkids. And we rent the one in Virginia Beach for a big part of the year. And I've told my property manager, don't let anybody bring any e-bikes into our property because, you don't want the place to go up.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I just feel like I feel like we're being priced out of everything. I feel like, these cars, I mean, what does like a Chevy, what is it, an Eldorado, I think, is their electric version of the Silverado or whatever? What's something like, what do you guys think something like that cost? Because trucks are, you get a 4-wheel drive truck and you're spending 75 grand, even if it's gas powered.
Yeah, I really don't know about that. I do know I've got a couple versions here. Vehicle prices have come down in part because the demand has fallen off. But the one I use for a benchmark, a 2023 Toyota Corolla, about 21,000, 22,000 MSRP. 2023 Chevy Bolt, roughly comparable. For the very low end model, about a 22% premium, which isn't real bad. But then, you need to add on the insurance and a lot of the other problems. You got to get a home charger, probably. A plug isn't good enough.
Yeah.
So the prices have come down a little, but we still have we got a demand fall off, and
yeah, my brother works at a dealership in their service department, and he's talked about how electric cars just kind of pile up when people trade them in. People don't want them. They're afraid that they're basically buying a time bomb. Eventually, because I've read this thing. I don't know if it's true, but it's saying on average, like an internal combustion car has like 2,000 moving parts, and an electric vehicle has like 20. But
20 parts.
Almost like in their drivetrain. But they're saying the odds of, well, they were just saying that any of those parts that get damaged can basically total it. It's not a thing where you can replace some smaller pieces that got hurt. It's, the whole battery has to go, all however many thousands of cells, or these electric motors have to go, or the computer, which is all expensive, and the way they build it kind of into the structure of the car makes it really rough. I've seen a few headlines. They're probably clickbait a little bit, or at least sensationalized, but talking about that a Hyundai Ioniq 5 battery replacement was quoted for somebody at $40,000. But I've seen a lot of Teslas that are 20,000 at least.
Can be a big number, and again, that's it doesn't take a big collision, I don't think. If you damage a battery in any way, you have problems. And as you know, those Chevy had to recall like 200,000 of those. I don't know. I remember it's the Bolt or the Volt, but whatever was the plug-in EV, because they were having fires out there. There's just a lot of cases. Near Chicago, there was a guy driving a Tesla, and it started to shake. I don't remember which model it was. He pulled over on the side of the road. This was in Elk Grove, got out of the car, and it erupted in flames. And he didn't have time to get the child seats out of the back. And he was really pleased. His kids were at home.
Wow.
There was another incident in Florida where a woman had her regular gasoline car into the dealer, and got an EV as a loaner, and then it burst into flame in her garage. It wasn't even being charged or anything, and damaged her house with smoke damage in a big way. So there's a bunch of problems with these. There's just so much energy in these lithium batteries. And as you know, when they don't let you take these and put these in the baggage compartment on a plane because there's a risk. They'll eventually solve these things, but it's just they do need to do something about the maintenance when you get in a little bit of a collision. And again, that's why Hertz is deciding to go back and get rid of the EVs that they started renting to everyone.
Yeah,
I don't blame them. So one of the reasons that they're doing this is to limit our freedom, right? How are they going to limit our freedom by making everything have to be electric?
Yeah, well, climatism requires coercion, if you will, because people don't want to necessarily get rid of their gas stove, and they don't want to get rid of their gasoline pickup truck typically. And so we do have a lot of groups that are trying to force everybody to accept these changes. And the two big areas are our cars and our appliances. So we have right now actually a war going on regarding appliances. We have about 6 or 7 states that have now banned, or at least their counties and cities have been trying to ban gas appliances from new construction. California, Oregon, Washington, I think Maryland, Massachusetts, New York, and some others. But at the same time, there's 19 states that have passed laws saying, well, head of your city and your county, you can't ban energy that people can put into houses. And we even had a recent law. The Berkeley, California, was the first city to put a ban into place on gas appliances in new construction, and they were sued by the Restaurant Owners Association in California. Great. They wanted to cook with gas stoves, and they ended up winning in court, the Ninth Circuit Court. And recently, the request to overturn that was also defeated. And so, there's a lot of reason to use gas. It's very convenient. It's lower cost typically, but we have all these folks running around saying that that gas stoves are bad, that they're health problems, a lot of other things. And then governments get in there and they're trying to force everybody to make a switch and get away from using their gas or gasoline fuels.
And tell us how they came to this conclusion about these gas stoves being so terrible for you, how they're so terrible for your health.
Yeah, there were a couple studies that broke last January that got national focus. But they basically said that gas stoves emit nitrogen oxide, which they do at high temperatures. They take the nitrogen in the air and it breaks down and it combines with oxygen, and then it goes back and is formed into nitrogen dioxide, which is a pollutant. The thing is that these levels are very, very low. The way they had to show that was they literally turned the burners on the oven on in a stove in a kitchen, and they sealed the whole kitchen with plastic so that nothing could get out. And then the levels of the nitrogen dioxide rose. That's the only way they could get them above the EPA levels, which are something like 50 parts per billion in a home for nitrogen dioxide. And then the other thing is, if you look at the people that wrote these studies, they weren't from the medical profession.
Right.
They were from the climate, the counter climate groups at universities. So people need carbon monoxide detectors in their homes, but they should be fairly sure that their gas furnaces and their gas stoves and their other gas appliances are generally not causing a health problem.
Yeah, I think that's pretty safe to say. We've been using them for quite a while now, and I don't know of a whole lot of people that have died except from like a carbon monoxide leak. So Certainly, no one I know with a gas stove has died from using their gas stove in the kitchen. So, but now the poster child in your book, the Mad. Finish the title for me. I can't.
World of Climatism.
Okay, so you've got that right above your left shoulder. That's one of the best book covers I've ever seen, and we'll put it up. But it's some polar bears riding around in a car, and polar bears have become the poster child for this climatism, and people are just straight up lying about it to everybody. Can you tell us about the polar bears?
Yeah, that was a fun cover, by the way. That's a Mazda of some sort, and I brought it to a guy, and he was able to actually put the polar bears behind the windshield. I thought that was really good. How did he do that
That's
on
cool.
an image? So never believe an image. People can do crazy things, but
Right.
yeah, polar bears have been the poster child for many, many years of the climate movement, and there were all kinds of. You could save polar bears if you went to the World Wildlife Association. You could contribute money, do all sorts of things. But what they don't tell you is that polar bear populations have been rising. Back in about 1970, we only had about 8,000 polar bears on the surface of the Earth. Now we have about 25 or 30,000. And the big reason is that the northern nations got together and signed treaties to limit hunting of polar bears. That was Norway and Russia and Canada. And so polar bear populations are going up, even though we've had a gentle warming, as I mentioned, over those years. And so it's become a little bit less of an issue now. I think the climate community realizes that polar bears aren't really grabbing the public here.
Yeah, the jig is up.
And a bigger one that has shown up recently is forest fires. That's the latest thing. Forest fires has become a big issue, supposedly.
Yeah. So how does climate change cause forest fires?
Well, that's really a crazy idea. Again, we're talking about a very small change. We're talking about 1 degree in 140 years. Now, in the case of California, Governor Newsom, actually, I have a video of him that I show sometimes. He's standing in front of a forest fire, and he says, "If you don't believe in climate, come to California." The debate is over.
Right.
But California has had, in terms of structures burned, in the last 10 years, they've had half of the worst forest fires in history. But you have to kind of go and look, okay, so what's the issue? And one of the problems is there have been a number of studies that point out the National Forest Service, for example, did a study in 2018. They said there were 140 million dead trees in California.
That could be a problem.
And there were other folks that said, for 50 or 100 years, California has been limiting any kind of fires. And if you live in California, as I understand, you can't even build a road through your own forest. It's very tough to do that, cut down any trees. And so you end up with these forests. And other groups have said that, fire is a natural way that forests remain healthy. And if you stop all the fires, then you end up with all these dead trees, all this debris. And so when a fire breaks out, nobody can put it out. It just burns, and it's a tremendous issue. And so the real issue here is forest management. That's what California needs to do. By the way, I like to point listeners to a study NASA did 2 years ago. NASA actually looks down with satellites, and they track all of the burned area in the world. They track all of the fires that are going on with satellites. And every August, we have about 10,000 fires burning across the world. But the interesting thing from their data is that the amount of burned area has been declining globally. It's down about 20% in the last 15 years. So then you got to kind of scratch your head and say, well, if fires are rising in California because of climate change, how come they're falling in all the rest of the world?
Right. What's California doing wrong? Because obviously you're doing something wrong if you're the only place that's having all this all these extra large, extra hot, extra deadly fires that are going everywhere, and they're coming for you if you don't get your electric vehicle.
So if you think you'd stop the fires by everybody driving an electric vehicle, you really need to go back and rethink that. That's not going to happen. Forest management is the key.
Right. And we've seen forest fires since the dawn of time. It's nothing new. And if you want to decrease forest fires, maybe you find the people that are flicking their cigarette butt in the woods and track them down and make them do some jail time or something. But yeah, I mean, electric vehicles stopping forest fires is hilarious. If it wasn't so sad. Can you tell us about transitional energy shocks? What does that mean? I'm not familiar with that term. Are you, Ryan?
No.
Actually, it's transnational. It's just
oh gosh, I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's a term that I coined, and it's one of the four things that Green Breakdown talks about. As we build more and more green energy, we're going to have four big issues. One is higher energy prices, particularly electricity prices that go up. We've talked about that with wind and solar. The second is electricity blackouts. The third is less freedom because they're going to force you to get rid of your appliances or your gasoline car if they can. And the fourth is transnational energy shocks. And we've seen the first of those, in my opinion, in Europe over the last 3 years.
Okay.
So what Europe has done over the last 2 decades is they had tremendous emphasis on wind and solar, and they built wind and solar everywhere. And they closed about 100 nuclear plants in Europe, about 30 in Germany and about 30 in the United Kingdom, and they become very dependent on imported natural gas. And this was all prior to the Ukraine invasion of 2022. And then what happened in 2021 is there was a wind shortfall in Europe. For most of the year, the wind electricity output was down 20 or 30%. And so what did Europe do? They burned more and more natural gas to make up the difference. And by the end of the year, they were short of natural gas. And the price of both electricity and natural gas was up by about 5 or 6 times what it was in the first part of 2021. And then and this was 3 months before the Ukraine invasion. Then they had the Ukraine invasion, and Russia cut off all of its gas going to Europe. And so their prices went through the roof. They just went crazy. And the only reason Europe last winter kept the lights on is the United States and Qatar shipped vast amounts of liquefied natural gas to Europe so that they could keep everything going. And now prices still remain very high. They're about 3 times as high for electricity and about 2.5 times as high for gas as they were 2 years ago. Europeans are paying 4 times the price we are for natural gas right now. And it's really impacted Europe. Their standard of living has been heavily impacted. In Hungary, they put wood-burning furnaces back into the schools because they were afraid they wouldn't have natural gas to use them. The British were told to stop showering so much to save energy, or to shower with a friend. That was another bit of advice.
Well, I could get behind that one, but
Depends on
skipping
the
a shower. Well, yeah, skipping a shower. No, thanks.
But they have energy bills that are 2,000 or 3,000 pounds a winter now. They're very, very high, and there are people in England that are literally putting newspaper up on the inside of their windows to increase their insulation. So this is a loss of standard of living that's going on in Europe right now, and it's because they've decided to go wind and solar. They shut down a lot of their coal plants. By the way, they restarted a lot of them when they got into this crisis.
I bet.
And they decided we're not going to do any hydraulic fracturing. There's like 40 shale fields in Europe that they could fracture and get oil and gas out of, but they said we're not going to do that. We're going to import all of it. And so they have a very big, very big energy problems right now. But that's the first of what I call transnational energy shocks. I think we're going to see one in Australia. We may see one in New England in the next few years if these trends continue.
Now, what I've seen, and this is not with necessarily with electricity or anything, but what I've seen, it seems like whenever the prices go up on something, they say, oh, well, it's because of this or it's because of that. But then they never go back down, right? Like trucks were 50,000. And then they said, well, gosh, there's a shortage on these chips. We can sell them for 75,000. Well, the chips are back, but the trucks are still 75,000. So are these energy price, will they come down if they go, sky high like that? Or will the companies just be like, well, we can charge them $3,000 a winter for this. Why would we charge them less?
Yeah, I don't know about the auto industry too much. That's a tough one for me. We have seen some energy prices come down in the past. We had a situation where oil was about $40 a barrel. That was about 4 or 5 years ago. The world actually over explored and over drilled up about 2015, and so the prices got down quite low. And then we had and then people stopped investing. And so the level of investment and exploration has been down the last 5 years, and the prices have climbed again to $70 or $80 a barrel. Natural gas tends to fluctuate as well. We've had very low prices for natural gas in the past. It's rising again right now. New England, by the way, pays 3 times the price of the rest of the nation for natural gas. And part of that is because the state of New York has stopped building pipelines to the 6 states that were east of New York for the last 2 decades. And so they don't have enough gas if they get a very cold winter. They've been actually imported liquefied natural gas at world prices, which is very expensive. And prior to the Ukraine invasion, they were actually importing liquefied natural gas from Russia. But so the prices can go up and down a little bit. But that's a bigger picture than just the climate issue or the energy issue.
Sure, that's fair. Okay.
I will add in though about prices, just my perspective. Steve, I used to own a bar, and I knew a bunch of other business owners in the area, including people who own bars and restaurants. And whenever I remember talking to a guy who owned a restaurant, and he was talking about this specific kind of beer. And I told him I didn't want to carry it because the price per half barrel was so high. The price per pint would have to be so high. And he was like, yeah, but I started carrying it and people pay it. People pay $10, $15 a pint if it's something weird. And then he was talking about creeping some of his other prices up. And then once the prices to us from the suppliers started to go down, he was like, I'm not going to lower my prices. Are you going to lower your prices? Like, people pay this. Why not? Just means our profits get a little bit better. And I don't know, it's just it's collusion, and it feels kind of slimy. So I didn't do anything like that. I specifically set up a system that would determine my prices based on whatever I was paying when my inventory came in. But I do feel like other industries are doing that. Like, I had pre-ordered a Ford Lightning, their electric pickup. And mine was supposed to be about 56 to 60,000. And when it came time to actually start making the payments and pick it up and really do the financing, they quoted me at about 80. And as far as I'm aware, that's still about the price of what they are. So I just told them, forget it. I'll take a refund on my deposit and I'll buy a regular gasoline powered one for half the price and then still have money left over to buy another one.
So you didn't get a Lightning, huh? You didn't get a Lightning? What's really interesting about these electric EVs, these pickups, they are very, very heavy.
Yeah.
A Ford F-150 Super Crew 2023, about 4,600 pounds, but the Lightning is 6,500 pounds. The Rivian R1T EV, 7,100 pounds, and the Chevy Silverado, 8,500 pounds. And if Quint from Jaws were here, he'd say 4 tons of them. You got a 4-ton pickup truck there. I mean, that is really big. And so eventually, if things work out, these electric vehicles are going to have to pay more road taxes because they're typically about 50% heavier than a gasoline version.
Well, they also go through tires faster. which can
Yes.
be expensive depending on the type of
Brakes.
vehicle and
Brake pads.
potentially, yeah.
Tires anyway, I know that. So yeah, the tires and the batteries are the big issue.
I've got a buddy that pre-ordered the Cybertruck, and there's this great video of this huge Cybertruck that just looks like a beast getting pulled out of a little mud puddle by an F-150.
Oh, no.
love it. It
Yeah, we'll have
is.
to see. It's hard to see how much market success that will have. We'll have to see.
Yeah, the EV thing is probably the topic I'm most interested in that we've been talking about, because I feel like if nothing else, moving away from fossil fuels is a good idea because of our health generally. I mean, it's probably better to not be breathing that stuff if you're walking around downtown Chicago or New York or whatever. But also
Well, I have good news on that as well. That
Okay.
if you look at EPA data, the volatile organic compounds that come out of a vehicle is down 98% since 1980. Now, I wouldn't advise closing the door and running your gasoline car, but almost everything that comes out now is water vapor and carbon dioxide. There's very little other stuff coming out of your vehicle, so we're a lot cleaner than we used to be. That is the good news.
That's actually a good point. I was behind like a 60s Dodge Dart that somebody here in town has.
Well, they're a little bit.
Yeah, and I realized, at first I was like, what does that smell? And then I just realized, I don't feel like I smell car exhaust anymore. Just like when you go to a gas station, you don't smell gas. They've done a really good job at filtering a lot of those pollutants out. But
So
as
one
far
of the
as
things we
go
can
on.
talk about a little bit is chargers. Now, people don't realize how poor the business case for chargers is. For example, if you compare a gasoline pump to an EV charger, a gasoline pump costs about $20,000, and you can serve a customer in 6 minutes. A 50 kilowatt DC charger, which is relatively high speed, costs $100,000, and it takes 30 minutes to charge a customer. So the pump serves 5 times the customers at 1/5 of the capital cost. I don't think any of these charging companies are going to make money because most people want to just charge at home, and so they're not going to have big demand out there for these chargers. And the fast chargers are very, very expensive. I think what's going to happen as EVs take off is eventually utilities are going to own these things, and they're going to charge ratepayers, and they're going to get subsidies from state and federal governments. There's a very poor capital case for an entrepreneur going in there and getting the charger. By the way, you look at the stocks of these charging companies, and they have not been doing good over the last 3 years.
Yeah, well, it sounds like a lot of them can't afford to maintain their current infrastructure anyway.
Yeah, you got to maintain them. Another thing is, originally these things were, we could put them anywhere, right? They don't have to be maintained. But so, in the winter after 4 at night or 5 at night, it's out in a parking lot somewhere. Is your wife going to want to go there and sit for 30 minutes and charge your car? No way.
Yeah,
I mean, talk about a target for a carjacking. So there's just a lot of issues. And another thing is, if I live in an apartment, am I going to run and I don't have a garage, I'm going to run an extension cord over the sidewalk to charge my EV. That's not such a good idea either.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, one of the first things I thought about was kids. Kids are going to come by and just pull the plugs out. Yeah, just for grins, just to do it. Like driving around downtown St. Louis, I was on South Grand and I saw people, I don't know, a couple years ago with those little bird scooters, like the small ones that don't have a ton of range, but you can rent them with that app. And they would just push them over or like kind of hide them or whatever.
Oh.
It's like just some impulse in kids to screw things up a little bit. So I could totally imagine a lot of people not being able to get to work because some kid just came by and I'll just pull that plug out.
Again, charging at home is great, but charging on the road is got a lot of problems.
Yeah, I mean, I've considered an electric vehicle myself, but I thought about road trips in particular.
Yeah.
And I drive an Audi A5 and I can get about 440 miles on a tank of about 14 gallons. at highway speeds, and it takes me 5 minutes. It takes me longer to use the restroom and get a cup of coffee than it does to fill up the car.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I mean, I've got a Cruise, okay, a 2018 Cruise, economy car, surprisingly adequate, 39 miles a gallon, 170 horsepower. That's not bad. I'll take that. Now, I also have an old truck, but I mean, it's not like every gas-powered vehicle out there is like a Dodge Hellcat that, is 800 horsepower, or it's not every truck is these turbo diesel trucks that have the big exhaust stacks that kick out all the black smoke. It's like there's gas cars and trucks that are extremely efficient. So it's the leap isn't that great from electric to an economy truck or an economy car either. So,
Well, hybrids are a pretty good deal too, I think, as
yeah.
well. Unfortunately, though, a lot of these governments, anything that's got an internal combustion engine in is a no-no. They don't want hybrids, and you don't get the same subsidies. By the way, did you know you can get up to $7,000 subsidy tax credit from your government to purchase an EV? And then if you buy a used EV, and then if you sell it and it's bought again, there's another credit up to $4,000. And if it's bought and sold again, another credit up to $4,000. I mean, there's an infinite amount of money that people want to shell out into these EVs.
Well, they want to give our money away. They don't want to give their money. They want to give our money to these companies.
It's not yours anymore once it goes to the government, right?
That's true.
Yeah, I didn't know that there was an incentive for secondary sales.
Yeah,
That's interesting.
I'm not sure of all the details, but I know you can get up to $4,000 for a used EV.
Well, they're like, guys, we got to do something. Nobody's buying these things. What can we do? Give them another subsidy. Why not? So there are people that will not be able to get over that driving an EV isn't going to save the planet. What are some things that are logical that we can do to reduce our carbon footprint without buying into this nonsense about, your truck is going to, ruin the lives of your grandchildren?
Well, I like to think of it more of as a pollution issue,
Okay.
not a carbon dioxide, because again, carbon dioxide is a harmless, odorless, invisible gas, makes plants grow. It's really not a problem. There are some major issues that we need to fix. One of those is discharge of wastewater into rivers, oceans, and streams. Not much in the United States or Europe, but about 80% of the world's wastewater is still discharged without being treated. If you remember, about 7 years ago, down in the Olympics near Brazil, 6-7 years ago, the swimmers didn't want to swim in the water. Brazil's building their first water treatment plants. That's a problem to be solved. Plastics in the ocean is another one.
Yes.
It's often overstated, but there's about 100 million tons of plastic in the oceans, they estimate, and the world is adding about 10 million tons a year. Most of that, again, is coming from Asia and developing nations, like only 1 or 2% from the US or Europe. Getting rid of plastic straws in San Francisco isn't going to have much of an effect. But we need biodegradable plastics as well. So there are a number of things that need to be done. And again, we need to keep reducing things like nitrogen dioxide, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide out of our atmosphere. But again, those are down, according to EPA data, again, those are down about combined 70 or 80% since 1970, even longer since 1950. My grandfather had a coal furnace in his basement, and in the 50s, and when it snowed in the winter, after about 5 days, you'd see a black film on top of the snow in Chicago. And people didn't know what spring cleaning was for. Literally, people would wash the inside of their walls every spring to take the coal dust off. So our air is very much cleaner than it was in those days. We've done a great job, and even China now is reducing particulate pollution in the atmosphere. Since about 2014, it's been going down in China, And as nations develop and they get wealthier, they start cleaning up their air and water. But that's what we ought to focus on. Carbon dioxide is not one of those things. That's a complete misnomer and a complete waste of time.
What do you think about nuclear power? I mean, just in terms of, do you think it's beneficial over coal and natural gas to offset the potential risks and the trouble with getting rid of waste? And then
Yeah.
what do you think that the, why
Well,
are there so many obstacles to it?
it's a mix. Again, in my latest book, Green Breakdown, I have some quotes in there. There were folks in the 1950s that thought, they said things like electricity is going to be too cheap to meter within 20 or 30 years. And they thought everything was going to go nuclear. But then we had 3 Mile Island, we had Chernobyl in Russia, we had Fukushima in Japan. In the 1990s, there were about 450 nuclear plants around the world. Now there's about 437. Nuclear was producing about 17% of global electricity in the 1990s. It's down to about 10% now. Electricity has been growing, but nuclear's been a little bit slow. The biggest issue with nuclear, I think, is the cost right now. And a lot of that is because of the regulations that have been put on nuclear and all the systems that have to be double backed up and all those sorts of things. We really need some technological breakthroughs with nuclear to lower the cost down again. It's much more expensive than natural gas. Examples are the recent fairly big nuclear plant that went into operation in Georgia. It cost like $30 billion. And it's up about a factor of 3 from what they thought it would be. England, a similar system. The new small modular reactors may be able to lower that cost point, or the molten salt reactors. But we need systems that will automatically shut down, that won't overheat and have a risk of damaging the reactor core. We need to do something with the waste. Most of that right now is stored on nuclear plant sites and is stored for many, many years in lead containers. But we need to get the price of nuclear down. I'm hoping we'll get some breakthroughs there.
Okay.
Well, Ryan, you had an interesting theory on how climate activists kind of shut down the nuclear industry.
Well, it's not a theory, but at least that's not how I'm thinking of it. But I have read a lot about that, how a lot of nuclear, like planned nuclear sites, have been kind of shut down by climate activists who I think misunderstand the dangers associated with it because of 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl, or Fukushima now. I mean, very few people, to my knowledge, have died as a result of nuclear power. Whereas I think coal-powered plants are linked to maybe like 50,000 deaths and serious illnesses every year just because of the particulates that they put out. I mean, people living within a certain distance of it are just breathing that stuff in, and they have respiratory illnesses, or you get hurt in the plant or on the machinery.
Yeah, it's more in the plant. I'm not real high in the particulate issues, but certainly nuclear has almost no deaths over in the U.S. anyway over the last 50 years.
Yeah.
But coal mines have always been an issue with people, that kind of thing.
That was the other factor of it. Yeah, just getting the coal itself contributed a lot of danger to people's lives. Cave-ins or injuries, whatever else.
You have to be careful of the particulates. That's another issue I discuss in several of my books. It really is overstated in many ways. The EPA says that people are dying prematurely from particulates, but the amount of particulates that the average person in the United States breathes in, for example, the EPA limit is 13 micrograms per cubic meter of air, and most places are under that. Now, if you say, okay, what is 13 micrograms over a 70-year lifetime? It turns out it's less than one teaspoonful of particles in a 70-year period. It's very, very small. And you got some crazy things going on too. In California, for example, in January 2019, they passed 2 laws, or 2 laws became effective. One was they had a law restricting particulates from leaf blowers and lawnmowers. Okay, that sounds good. But the other one was they legalized the recreational use of marijuana. So if you smoke a marijuana joint, you get like 100 billion small particles in a single joint. That's more than breathing an entire year of California air. But no, we got to go after those leaf blowers, that kind of thing. Another thing is a big forest fire in California releases more particulates than all of the vehicles do in a year. So we're getting to a point in most cases because of scrubbers put on plants and catalytic converters on cars, where the levels of particulates are very, very low relative to the background level. It still is an issue around the world. If you're cooking with wood or dung or charcoal in a hut in Africa, then you're getting about 200 times as many particles as a person in the United States is, and then it does cause respiratory problems and disease and premature death. But in the United States, the levels are very, very low. So again, we've done a great job over the last 20, 30, 40 years of getting rid of this pollution that hurts people.
Absolutely. Well, do you have anything else that you want to share before we wrap it up? I mean, obviously, we'll give you a chance to tell us about what's in each of your books and your website, but is there anything else that you want to wrap up with?
Not too much. Let's talk about a couple of my books.
Yes.
One with the polar bears called The Mad, Mad, Mad World of Climatism. And by the way, the last 3 books I've written are a lot of fun. They're color paperbacks. I hired a cartoonist to do a cartoon in front of each chapter. I tried to be as sarcastic as possible about, and all these things are headlines that you read every day about the climate, but it tells the complete story of all the climate issues, of storms, of polar bears, of droughts and floods, and the theory. And then my recent one, Green Breakdown, the coming renewable energy failure, is a complete discussion of the efforts to force an energy transition. And it talks about energy history. It talks about energy for power plants, your appliances. It talks about vehicles, electric vehicles, ships and planes and heavy industry. And it tells you why this is going to break down, and people are going to push for more sensible and low-cost, reliable energy. And by the way, there's a lot of great sidebars in all of these. For example, in Green Breakdown, and these are headlines from actual newspapers. There was a New York Times article that said we should all mate with short people to stop climate change. And there's a professor in Sweden who is advocating that we all eat human flesh to stop climate change. And then he will poll his audience at the end of his presentation, asking how many want to try human flesh.
Is he being serious, or is he trying to be
serious? He's being serious. Then there's a guy in California who is a cosmetic surgeon.
Yeah, I heard.
And he was boiling down fat and tissue he got from his patients and producing biofuel for his cars and his girlfriend's car. I think he was actually prosecuted because I don't think that's a legal thing to do. But so these books are full of these crazy things, which make them a lot of fun to read. But they're all true headlines of what's actually been going on.
And the facts are laid out nice and easy for challenged people like myself to understand. So, all right. Well, thanks so much for slumming it with us for a night. You've got an open invitation to come back to the show. You were amazing. I love how you bring a sense of humor to this topic, because that seems extremely difficult.
Okay, great. And again, they can get Green Breakdown from my website, Steve Goreham, GOREHAM.com. I'll send them a signed copy. They're on Amazon, of course. Actually, Green Breakdown was #1 on Amazon last week for the energy policy category, and then there are ebooks available as well.
Well, we'd like it if they would go to your website and get it, because I'm kind of anti-Amazon with all their carbon footprint from those vans that are driving everywhere. So
yeah.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us tonight. You have a wonderful evening. Ryan, you got any final thoughts on tonight's episode?
Yeah, I think something that we didn't touch on that maybe we should have is the idea that a lot of what we're being told seems to be trying to communicate the idea that we are responsible for climate change, like me and you.
Mhm.
Like it is because of our personal decisions.
Right.
Not the fact that gasoline cars were the only thing available for the last 100 years.
Mhm.
Not because, I mean, I always thought like gas stoves were better.
Mhm.
I thought they were more efficient. It takes a lot of energy and a lot of electricity to heat up a coil to heat
Mhm.
up an electric stove.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know. I think that there needs to be more ownership for these issues taken by companies and governments, and probably more mature solutions offered because I could talk about the EV thing all day. I mean, they're still like Tesla. If you buy a Tesla, depending on which one you get, there are two different battery chemistries right now that you could get. You know,
Really?
there's the original one that uses cobalt and all this stuff, and then I wasn't prepared to talk about this, so I don't have it like
Mhm.
just on my mind right now. But I know there's a new battery type that emits or omits a lot of these rare metals in their construction, and they have benefits and drawbacks. But it's also one of these things where we don't know how they're going to really last over the long term. Like they're fairly new. Like he's talking about these mining operations where the conditions are really poor and there's a lot of pollution.
Mhm.
You know, this is trying to help with that, but does that mean that your battery now lasts 70,000 miles instead of 100,000? I mean, there are people out there who've had batteries on Teslas last 300,000 miles or more. You know, if you take care of it well, who knows how long it could go, but I don't know. I've always thought that if electric vehicles are going to succeed, we need a more convenient way to fuel them.
Oh yeah.
I think it should be like a propane tank. You
Yeah.
trade in your battery, you pull up into a station, there's a little pit underneath, they drop the battery down, put a new one in it, you pay like 20 or 30 bucks, and you're off. You don't own the battery. It's, you know, that could be part of the agreement. Like the battery's owned by whatever company or set of companies, however that's going to
Shell.
work. Yeah, I mean, that way when the batteries are worn out, they're just taken out of circulation and recycled. Because that is a positive thing about them. I have read that about 94% of the materials in those batteries can be turned around when they're recycled.
How much electricity or gas does it take to recycle a Tesla battery?
I don't know. That's a good question. A whole
You
lot
will
less than
never
digging it
know.
out of the ground in the first place, though.
Yeah. You want to drive a conflict vehicle? You know, we talked about people like they don't want to buy blood diamonds. Well, fuck.
Yeah.
I mean, you're buying blood batteries when you're, allowing this. I mean, dude, the Congo's insane. It's insane. Like they
Yeah.
will
Well,
just chop your fucking arm off if you don't work like they want you to. They'll kill your mom, whatever. It's insane.
I've seen a lot of people saying, I want to switch to an EV because I don't want to pay for fossil fuels that are supporting groups in the Middle East that are doing whatever wonderful things they're doing.
Yeah, but I also heard that like the United States gets like 2% of its oil from the Middle East.
Yeah, the US is fairly self sufficient as far as oil goes.
And when they stop selling it, we're like, "Psh, all right, we'll use our own."
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
it's shady, it's underhanded, but it is what it is. And yeah, I mean, it just you can't produce energy out of nothing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you just can't. So if you want to have something powered, it's got to come from somewhere. And I didn't want to keep him on too long, but I did want to ask him about these like water powered cars and stuff like that. And I do think that the guy, come on, man, what kind of a fucking schmuck surgeon is so stingy that he's like, I'm going to burn down fat and use it to power my girlfriend's car. I mean, I believe the story, but that's got to be like a crazy person, right? That's not like a
he was thinking about, he was like stirring a cauldron with these parts in it, thinking about how like nasty the Times article about him was going to be when they caught him.
Oh gosh.
It's like, I'm going to be famous.
It's so bad. But I think that people are being completely swindled. Just completely swindled. And yeah, we all want to reduce our carbon footprint. We don't want to leave 1 billion plastic bottles in our wake, right?
Right.
We don't want to, uh, you change the oil in your car, you take it to get it recycled. You don't dump it in the fucking garden or something like that. But it's got to come from somewhere, and these people are just being swindled. And the problem is, wait for it, smug. You remember that from South Park?
Yes. Yeah, where the
It's
the
smug.
Oscars were happening, and there was a front of smug passing through or whatever. However they phrased it.
It is people. Once people get on high moral ground and they think they're better, they don't give a shit what you say. It does not matter because they're better than you. And they don't have to listen to you because they're better than you, Ryan. They drive an electric vehicle. It's bullshit. Stop falling for it, people. All right, that's my final thoughts.
No, I like his approach though.
Absolutely.
Steve's. I really, from my research, I mean, when you watch TV, they're saying we're all going to die in a couple years if we don't get this under control.
Mm-hmm.
What I've read is more in line with what he's saying. Not that it's not real, like it's happening. And what I've read is that, we would like on a sort of geological scale, we would be in a warming trend right now anyway.
Mm-hmm.
It's happening faster than it should, or faster than it has in the past, and that's probably because it's not because there's one car out there, it's because there's billions of cars out there, or millions, or however many. But it's not something that necessarily wouldn't have happened anyway, and it's more important probably to get a handle on the pollution.
What
And
about
it's
the
like,
bees?
yeah, and the bees.
Gotta have bees. Kind of important. None of this
But
matters without bees, Ryan.
yeah. And that's the bees are a great way to end my thoughts on this, because there's like this clockwork perfection to how the world works.
Right.
Like everything is kind of perfectly in balance, and if you take this little piece out or that little piece changes too much,
Butterfly
things get
effect.
out of whack, and it's a house of cards almost.
Jenga.
And it's one of the things that, apart from just personal experiences, that makes me believe in a lot of the paranormal, or the idea that there is some kind of guiding force, whatever you want to call it. Because it just seems so improbable that we would have this like kind of perfectly balanced universe.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, he brought a much more tame, middle of the road. These are the big issues we need to be focused on. If we can reduce carbon, cool, but we should not reduce it too much. If we can reduce pollution, great. We should do that, and we need to do it responsibly. But that, like, things are bad but not terrible, and we're probably going to be fine. That's not a title you click on.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't scroll past that on like your cable provider and be like, oh, I'll watch whatever this documentary is.
Yeah, some of the let me see the slides that were on here. Where's the newspaper one? There we go. Yeah. Oh, he already mentioned these. Okay. Yeah, July could be the hottest month in 120,000 years. And The Guardian, the era of global boiling has arrived. We're all gonna die from a 1 degree increase.
Yeah. Like, I think it's real. I think it's I'm starting to get concerned about how hard they're trying to push certain solutions.
They're not intelligent solutions. They have more problems than answers.
Yeah, potentially. Yeah, for sure. All right, well, is that where you want to end it?
Pretty much. Let's see here. All right, that's all we've got for you tonight on Cryptique. Please like, subscribe, and share. Socials are in the notes. Email us at cryptiquepodcast@gmail.com. You can find our stuff at cryptiquepodcaststore.com, and you can buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/PI. And remember, the Earth does not negotiate with anyone. She doesn't care how powerful you are. She does what she does, at least according to Catherine Hayo. Good evening, Crypt Keepers.